And the idea that I'm going to talk about today, that I'm going to focus on, is that readers make leaders, right? And you may think that, well, it's actually not a new idea. I mean, in fact, TED has another section called TED Ed, and I found this there. Today a reader, tomorrow a leader. This is as old as the history of reading. People have talked about how readers become leaders. Now, so why would I talk about this idea now in a TEDx event in Odisha? Okay, but of course the audience is not just limited to Odisha, elsewhere. But that's because, particularly in India, we don't understand this adage that readers make leaders. I'll share a story. I was doing my PhD in English literature at Delhi University. And initially I was staying in the hostel, and then I moved to an independent house outside. Now I chose that house because it has a wonderful balcony overlooking the park. So most of my time, because in English literature, you have to read. Now you don't have to go to a lab. So I don't have to go to the university per se. So most of the time I was in my balcony reading, whether it is newspapers or books, whatever. Now my landlord's son, after a couple of months, he always looked at me very with quizzical eyes. He was unable to figure me out. And then one day he finally blurted it out. He said, Sujit bhaiya, aap kya bacche ho? I said, why? Sujit bhaiya, are you a kid? I said, why? Aap kitab padhte ho? You read a book. And I was like shocked. And then suddenly it took me a couple of minutes to figure out what was really happening. And then I realized that the parents of this kid must be after him. He read, aap kitab padho. And the kid must have gone back to them and said, well, aap to kitab nahi padhte. You don't read books. Why are you asking me to read books? And then the parents would have said, aap bacche ho na. And that is why the kid thought that kids should read. And once you grow up, you don't have to read. Now that is a problem, right? We ask children to read. One is, of course, whether we value reading or not. But second, even if we value reading, and when I say reading, I'm talking about reading beyond the textbook, right? Not just limited to the textbooks. Now, for example, Arun talked about how he's been exploring and learning new things. Of course, that cannot be if you just follow your silos, right? Now, so that is the problem. I mean, children don't see parents read, right? So why will they think that reading is important? Now, not just limited to parents, even teachers. I once did a teacher training for teachers of government schools in Odisha on reading promotion. And what I did is a game that we all love to play. So I asked everyone to play musical chairs. Okay. And when anyone had to exit, I told them, you had to talk about a book that you've read in the recent past. I kept it vague enough. And you won't believe it, or you will definitely. Most people ended up sharing stories from Ramayana or Mahapatra or Gandhi's autobiography. I didn't say anything. The next day, almost all of them came to me and said they felt really embarrassed because they do not read. Ramayana, Mahabharata, Gandhi's autobiography, these stories you've heard all your life, and you can just share anecdotes from them, even if you have not read anything in the last 2 decades, right? And that is what happened. So the problem here is we do not read. Children do not see us reading. And so why will they think that it is important to read? There was a time when most educated people, by education, again, I mean those who've gone through formal education, acquired degrees, they were readers. They used to read beyond what was there in the curriculum. But now we have a vast population that can read, but that does not read, right? But then you may say, what is the problem? Well, I'll share a story, a very brief story. I was talking to a senior police officer friend of mine, and she said that she has been encouraging she keeps telling all her staff, subordinates, the inspectors, the sub-inspectors, etc. Please do not harass a person when he comes to a police station to file an FIR. Okay. And because we all know that none of us really, we dread the prospect of going to a police station. And she said, but one practical problem. I said, what? She said that most of them, apart from the inspector in charge, cannot draft an FIR. I said, what do you mean? They are graduates, right? Undergraduates. bachelor's at least. Yes, but they can't even write their own leave application, she said. And that is when it struck me, if people cannot write their leave application, what must be happening to all those cases being drafted? The case is lost there itself, because the first document in the case is the FIR. And if it is so poorly drafted, obviously the case is lost there, right? So it's, we talk about India having a huge population that is unemployable. And that unemployability is because of basic skills like reading and writing are fundamental skills. I mean, that leads to anything else. And if you don't have that, then, I mean, everything else is lost. And the situation is actually nothing less than a pandemic. It's just that we don't recognize it as much. For example, I don't know if you know the statistics. There's something called the Annual Status of Education Report, ASSAR. And if you Google it, you'll find that ASSAR has been coming out with these reports from about 2007, where they have pointed out that even now, about 50% children in grade 5, I'm talking about across schools, I'm not talking about your school, across schools, particularly government schools, 50% children in grade 5 cannot read the grade 2 textbook. Now, so if they're in grade 5 and they cannot read the grade 2 textbook, what are they getting out of school? I mean, I shudder to think about it. But that is because we have not given enough importance to reading. And there again, the problem lies. And it is not just for children in government schools. Those of you, one part of my life also is I have been a trainer for students aspiring for careers in law, in management, okay, study abroad like GRE, GMAT and all. And all of them face a problem. They've done all that they wanted to do, being toppers and etc. But then got their grades. But now when they want to get into a career of their choice, they need to work on the reading comprehension, the reading skills. CLAT has clearly said that you cannot prepare for it. You need to have those intrinsic reading skills now. You can't just mug up vocabulary, before the exam and you will do well. And I've seen, GRE, you may think, I want to do a PhD in astrophysics at Harvard University, but why do I have to work on my reading comprehension? Because that is a fundamental skill. If you can read and analyze and understand, without that, you can't do anything else, right? So that is why it is such a fundamental skill, and there is no escaping this skill wherever we go. And unfortunately, that is not something that we have been giving enough importance to. So everywhere, and what is the advantage if we can read, but we do not, like Mark Twain said, there is no advantage there, right? I'll tell you, just to explain this problem, I thought about why we don't give importance to reading in our education system. And then I realized there's a historical issue here. I don't know if you understand this image that I've shared. This is of the Bible being printed. The Bible was the first book to be printed. Okay, so that is why the word biblio is like a generic term for books. Okay, now what happened when the Bible was printed in the Western world is that it had a revolutionary impact. The Bible replaced the priest in the church and became the direct intermediary between God and man, right? So the Bible had a revolutionary role. That led to the Protestant movement, the Reformation. It led to the Renaissance, which is like a rebirth of the human spirit. That led to Shakespeare and the other big artists, writers, etc. Now, the Renaissance happened because of the availability of the book, because it democratized knowledge. People could access books. You don't have to be privileged to be able to have access to those manuscripts or to have access to the word of God. But in India, when the British came, obviously the printing presses were set up in the late 19th century and books were printed, but the book never replaced the guru in India. We never looked at the book as the source of knowledge. It was still the teacher, the guru, right? What had a revolutionary impact rather in India was the examination. Because if you cracked the civil services examination, then you could become like a sahib, like this guy in the black coat, right? You could join the British civil service and become an oppressor and not just be the oppressed. And that is why, because of that historical legacy, we put so much importance on our exams and we don't really focus on a reading habit. And that is also because most of us And when I say most of us, I'm talking about parents, everyone. Most of us actually get the purpose of education wrong. Most of us think that the purpose of education is to give information, is to give knowledge. But then in a digital universe, okay, I can easily get information or knowledge on my fingertips. Why do I need a school, right? So the purpose of education, that is where we have been wrong, and not just now. The purpose of education is not to teach, is not to give knowledge. The purpose of education is to create learners. So the question is, are we creating independent learners? And that is the most important thing. Very often I talk to young people who teach children, and I ask them, what do you do? Well, they say that children cannot study, so we help them understand the lessons. I said, that's great. But are the children able to read the textbook and answer on their own? And they say, we're not sure. So that is when I tell them, see, it is not important. See, what is more important? Is it important that you teach, or is it important that children learn? Very often, we miss that distinction. We conflate the two, right? So independent learners is what should be the purpose of education. Now, Albert Einstein had this wonderful thing. He said, I never teach my pupils. I only attempt to provide the conditions in which they can learn. And conditions are access to learning. That is why libraries are so important. That is why, access to books or even technology, internet is so important, so that you can learn independently, self-motivated learning. This is, you would not know this guy. This guy is Andrew Carnegie. He was like the Bill Gates of the 19th century, a steel magnate, like Jamshedji Tata was in India. Now, he started out as a laborer, and his life changed when he had access to a library. Okay, and that is why he used all his money to set up these Carnegie libraries across the US. And you talk to most Americans who have an understanding of history, and they will say that America became the superpower in the 20th century because of these Carnegie libraries. I mean, think about it. Who are the Americans? It was the Dutch, the Spaniards, the Italians, the Indians, the Chinese. Most of them did not know English. Of course, the English knew, the Australians, the Canadians, the Indians, they knew, many of the Indians. How did the others become a part of the American dream? They would not go to primary school, but they went to these Carnegie libraries to develop themselves. Libraries are a wonderful place for self-motivated learning. I will not feel bad about reading a children's book. And so that is what Einstein meant when he said that create the conditions in which children can learn. Bill Gates, we talked about the Bill Gates of the 19th century. Bill Gates has, he has a habit of reading even now about 50 books a year. That is almost a book every week. And he has said this, I had a lot of dreams when I was a kid, and it came out of the fact that I had a chance to read a lot. Because reading, gives you wings. You think of other worlds, imagination. Steve Jobs had this wonderful, and we are talking about icons of the digital world, right? So when you talk about connecting the dots, when you read, you cannot connect the dots if you're just following a curriculum which everyone else is. The dots, the whole relevance of this argument comes in when the dots seem disconnected, and that happens from varied reading, right? You can create new ways, new pathways only if you have access to other information, other insights, which you're trying to bring together to create new worlds. Okay, and that is what, and not only that, for leadership, you also need empathy. Fiction reading, allows you to have perspectives of many other people. And that is the advantage with reading as well. Now, this is a very interesting thing. Now, a parent had gone to Einstein and said, and I would probably end here in a little while, I want my son to be a scientist, so what do I do? Einstein said, then read him fairy tales. And the parent said, come on, it's a serious question, don't joke. And Einstein said, well, I'm giving you a serious answer. If you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. Why? Because as all of you, I'm sure, are already answering it yourself, it. In fairy tales, in fantasies, what we do not know can happen. We know that it cannot happen, but in fairy tales and fantasies, that can happen. You think of possibilities, and that is, what happens when you read, right? So that is why the work that we do, that I do, focuses on creating libraries, on creating a reading habit, and we also did something called Puri Reads, Puri Leads, and there are many stories of inspiration where children have actually, their lives have changed, or they have talked about different possibilities. In Bhubaneswar, we used to have something called Rahagiri. Okay, on the streets on Sunday mornings, I don't know if it was happening in Sambalpur also, a major part of the main street was cordoned off, and there used to be activities, and we used to have a library there. And one day it was raining, and we had not taken books. So these three children, they came and said, "Don't you have your library?" I said, "Well, it's raining, so we have not got our books. We were doing some other campaign." So they went away. Then they came back after 30 minutes and said, "No, we want to read something. Don't you have something?" And then we had some newspapers, old newspapers that we had used to pack something, and we gave it to them. And you can see them trying to read here. They read for some time and then they left. After some time, now because it was raining, it was not as crowded as it normally is, we could see those children at a distance begging for food. So there were street children who used to come every Sunday morning to Rahagiri, or Pathotsav as it was renamed, to actually beg for food, but looking at other children reading, they got infected with the love and they wanted to read. Have we changed their lives? No. But have we created an interest to dream of another world? Possibly, yes. Of course, as Harry Truman, the former US president, said, if you become a reader, you will it is not guaranteed that you will become a leader, but definitely all leaders are readers because of many things that I have said. I can go on, but I think it's time for me to stop. Thank you very much. And I know the difference between a reader and someone who is not is just that you are yet to find the book that will get you into the love for reading. So you just need to discover that book, and the reading and the books will take you to different worlds. Thank you very much.